Imagine you are standing in a hallway outside an apartment on the 27th floor of a building in Harlem. Behind the door are three armed fugitives. There is no window to look through, no camera, no way to know whether anyone inside is hurt or armed or about to do something irreversible. Nobody is answering. And you have a phone, a voice, and nothing else. What do you say? Most of us will never be in that hallway. But almost all of us this week will be in some smaller version of it. We will sit across from a landlord who wants more rent than we can pay. We will ask a manager for a raise and feel our throat go dry. We will try to convince a teenager to come home by midnight, or a supplier to move a delivery date, or a spouse to agree on where to live for the next 10 years. And in those moments, we discover something uncomfortable. Everything we thought we knew about negotiating, be reasonable, be logical, meet in the middle, tends to evaporate the instant real emotion enters the room. Chris Voss spent 24 years learning what actually works when the stakes are absolute and the other side is terrified, angry, or both. His book, Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it, published in 2016 and written with the journalist Tahl Raz, is his attempt to hand ordinary people the toolkit he built in the worst rooms in the world. The title itself is a provocation. Splitting the difference sounds fair. It sounds mature. Voss argues it is often the laziest, most damaging thing you can do, a way of buying relief from discomfort with the currency of the outcome you actually wanted. Today, I want to walk through what this book really says, why it landed so hard on so many readers, where I think it is genuinely brilliant, and where I think it deserves some pushback. Because this is not a book about winning. It is, underneath the tactics and the FBI war stories, a book about the strange and difficult discipline of paying attention to another human being. Christopher Voss was born in November of 1957 in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should, because a good deal of the book's charm comes from a plain-spoken Midwestern voice describing situations of extraordinary violence with the tone of a man discussing crop yields. He earned a Bachelor of Science from Iowa State University and later a Master of Public Administration from the Harvard Kennedy School, a combination of the practical and the institutional that runs all the way through his thinking. His career reads like a compressed history of American crisis response. From 1986 to 2000, he was a member of the New York City Joint Terrorism Task Force. He spent 3 years investigating the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, one of roughly 500 agents on that case, and was involved in monitoring the New York City landmark bomb plot. He served as co-case agent during the investigation of the explosion of TWA Flight 800 in 1996. In 1992, he received hostage negotiation training at the FBI Academy, and he went on to spend 24 years in the Bureau's Crisis Negotiation Unit. From 2003 to 2007, he was the FBI's chief international hostage and kidnapping negotiator, meaning that when an American was taken somewhere far away and terrible, the phone that rang was his. In 2006, he was lead negotiator on the case of the journalist Jill Carroll in Iraq and on the case of Steve Centani in the Gaza Strip. He supervised additional hostage cases in the Philippines, in Colombia, and in Haiti. By the time he retired from the FBI in 2007, he had worked on more than 150 international hostage cases. He received the Attorney General's Award for Excellence in Law Enforcement and the FBI Agents Association Award for Distinguished and Exemplary Service. After the Bureau, he founded the Black Swan Group, a consultancy and training firm now registered in Las Vegas, Nevada, which teaches negotiation to businesses and individuals. He became an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business and at Harvard Law School, and a lecturer at the Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California. In 2019, he created and narrated a masterclass on the art of negotiation. He has written 2 further books, The Full Fee Agent, aimed at real estate professionals, in 2022, and Empathy and Understanding in Business, in 2024. He turns up regularly on CNBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR. So the context of the book is a man translating one profession into another. Voss is explicit that the translation surprised him. He assumed hostage negotiation was a specialist art. What he found, teaching at business schools and consulting for companies, is that the emotional physics are identical. A private equity partner defending a valuation and a man holding a bank full of frightened people are both, at bottom, human beings who feel cornered, unheard, and in danger of losing something. The scale changes. The nervous system does not. The book opens by picking a fight, politely, with the orthodoxy. For decades, the dominant framework in negotiation teaching came out of the Harvard program on negotiation and its landmark book, Getting to Yes. That framework taught you to separate the people from the problem, to focus on interests rather than positions, to invent options for mutual gain, and to know your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, your BATNA, so you would know when to walk away. It is elegant. It is rational. It made an enormous contribution. Voss's objection is not that it is wrong, but that it is incomplete in a way that becomes catastrophic under pressure. Separate the people from the problem? In a hostage crisis, the people are the problem. And more importantly, they are also the solution. You cannot bracket someone's emotions and negotiate with the leftover logic, because there is no leftover logic. The emotion is the operating system. Everything else runs on top of it. He grounds this in the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, whose research demolished the tidy fiction of Homo economicus, the perfectly rational, self-interested calculator that classical economics assumed we all were. Kahneman's model of two systems is central here. System 1 is fast, instinctive, emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical. And the crucial finding, the one that reorganizes everything, is that System 1 does not merely interfere with System 2. System 1 goes first. It generates the impulse, the gut read, the felt sense of the situation, and then System 2 dutifully constructs a rational-sounding justification for whatever System 1 already decided. We are not reasoning machines that occasionally get emotional. We are emotional machines that occasionally reason. Related findings do the rest of the damage to the rational model. Framing effects mean that the same offer, described two different ways, produces two different answers. Loss aversion means we will fight harder and take bigger risks to avoid losing $100 than to gain $100. Certainty has an inflated premium. Probability is systematically misjudged. Voss's conclusion is a redirection of effort. If your counterpart's decisions are being made by System 1, then arguing better facts at System 2 is like shouting instructions at the passenger while the driver ignores you. The leverage is upstream. If you can influence how the other person feels, heard, safe, respected, in control, you influence the machinery that is actually producing the answer. This is where he introduces the term that anchors the whole book, tactical empathy. Note both words. Empathy here is not sympathy, not agreement, not niceness. It is the disciplined act of identifying and articulating another person's perspective and emotional state accurately enough that they recognize themselves in your description. And tactical means it is deployed with intent toward an outcome. You are not required to like your counterpart. You are required to understand them because understanding is the only reliable entry point to influence. The first tool is not a phrase. It is a sound. Voss describes three voices available to a negotiator. There is the direct or assertive voice, which he says should almost never be used because it announces dominance and reliably triggers pushback. There is the playful, positive voice, which he considers the default, the voice of someone easygoing and good-natured, the sound of a person who has time. And then there is the one that made the book famous, the late-night FM disc jockey voice. Low, slow, calm, with a downward inflection at the end of sentences. Not aggressive. Not warm, exactly. Just settled. The mechanism is worth pausing on because it explains why so much of this book works. Your nervous system reads other nervous systems constantly and beneath conscious awareness. A calm voice in a tense room is not a stylistic choice. It is a physiological intervention. It communicates, below the level of argument, that this situation is under control. And when a smile is genuine, Voss notes it is detectable in the voice even over a phone line, it tends to be contagious. You are, quite literally, regulating the other person's body from across the table. Then comes mirroring, which is almost embarrassingly simple. You repeat the last 1 to 3 words your counterpart just said, with a slight upward, questioning inflection. That is it. That is the whole technique. Its effect is out of all proportion to its cost. A mirror tells the other person, without any claim or challenge, that you are listening and you want more. It creates a small vacuum of silence into which they pour elaboration. And elaboration is information, often information they did not intend to give and had not fully articulated to themselves. Voss's advice is to mirror and then shut up. The silence does the work. Most of us cannot bear 4 seconds of silence, and so we fill it, and in filling it we hand over the map. This is where the Harlem standoff comes back. 3 fugitives, 27th floor, 6 hours of a door that would not open. Voss describes running that entire negotiation on the disc jockey voice and mirroring, almost nothing else. No threats, no bargaining, no clever gambits. Just calm sound and patient reflection. And they came out. When it was over, one of them said something that has stayed with a lot of readers. They had simply stopped being afraid. Nobody argued them out. They were talked into a state where surrender no longer felt like annihilation. There is something almost subversive in that. We imagine negotiation as the art of what you say. Voss's opening move is that most of your power is in how you sound and how well you shut up. The next tool takes the mirror 1 step further. Instead of reflecting words, you name the emotion underneath them. Labeling means saying things like, "It seems like this timeline is a real problem for you. It sounds like you have been burned before. It looks like there is something about this proposal that bothers you." Voss is insistent about the grammar. You use "it seems," "it sounds," "it looks," never "I'm hearing that," or "I think you feel." The moment you insert the word "I," the sentence becomes about you, and the other person's guard goes up. The neutral construction lets the label float in the air where they can accept it, correct it, or expand on it. And here is the important part. A wrong label is nearly as useful as a right one. If you say "it seems like you are worried about the cost," and they say no, actually it is the timing, congratulations, you have just been handed the truth. There is very little downside. The only real error is not labeling at all. Why does this work? Voss leans on neuroscience. Putting feelings into words appears to reduce their intensity, dampening activity in the brain's threat circuitry, the amygdala, and shifting processing toward the more deliberate regions. An emotion that is named is an emotion that loses some of its grip. This is why the counterintuitive instruction in the chapter title lands. Don't feel their pain, label it. You are not supposed to drown in their distress. You are supposed to hold it up where both of you can see it and watch it shrink. The most aggressive application of this is what Voss calls the accusation audit. Before the other side can hit you with everything bad about your position, you say it first, all of it, in the worst possible framing, out loud. You are going to think I'm being unreasonable. You are probably convinced my company overpromised and underdelivered. You are going to feel like I'm asking you to do the impossible on an insulting timeline. You list the accusations before they are made. It feels like handing someone a loaded weapon. In practice, it disarms them. Grievances gain power from being unspoken and suspected. Once you have said the thing yourself, calmly, they cannot use it as ambush, and the almost automatic human response is to soften it. Well, it's not that bad. Voss reports this again and again. Preemptively voicing the worst thing your counterpart could say about you frequently causes them to argue you out of it. Underneath both mirroring and labeling sits a claim I find genuinely important. Most people do not listen. They wait, rehearsing their next line, treating the other person's speech as dead air between their own contributions. Voss's tools are, in effect, mechanical devices that force real listening on people who would not otherwise manage it. You cannot mirror what you did not hear. You cannot label what you did not track. The technique is a scaffold for an attitude. Now comes the part of the book that most reverses conventional wisdom. Every sales manual, every persuasion seminar, every self-help chapter tells you to get people saying yes. Small yes build to big yes. Voss says this is not just ineffective, it is actively counterproductive because it makes people defensive and because most of the yes you collect are worthless. He divides yes into 3 kinds. There is the counterfeit yes, where your counterpart intends to say no but thinks yes is an easier escape route. There is the confirmation yes, a simple reflexive acknowledgement that a statement is true, carrying no commitment whatsoever. And there is the commitment yes, the real one, the one that means action will follow. Only the third has any value, and the first two are far more common. When you chase yes, you train people to give you the cheap versions. Worse, the pursuit of yes is transparent. We have all been on the receiving end of it. The moment someone starts fishing for our agreement, we feel the hook, and we brace. So Voss inverts it. No is not failure. No is the start. No is protection. When someone says no, they feel safe. They feel they have retained autonomy, and the anxiety of being maneuvered drops away. Only from that position of safety are they willing to actually think about your proposal. The practical form of this is the no-oriented question. Instead of asking, is this a good time to talk, ask, is now a bad time to talk. Instead of do you agree, ask, are you against this idea? Instead of chasing someone who has gone silent, which is the most common and most futile move in professional life, Voss offers a single line that he says has an almost supernatural hit rate. Have you given up on this project? Two things are true about that email. It costs the recipient almost nothing to answer. And answering it requires them to say no, which restores their sense of control and reopens the conversation they had been avoiding. Voss acknowledges an intellectual debt here to Jim Camp, whose book, Start with No, argued a similar case from a different direction. But Voss's contribution is to tie it to safety. No is where people go to feel that they are still the author of their own decisions. If you never let them get there, they will spend the entire negotiation looking for the exit rather than looking at your offer. There is a deeper lesson buried in this. Most negotiating pressure is an attempt to remove the other side's autonomy. And human beings will burn down enormous value to protect their autonomy. Voss's move is to give it away freely, to make no available, easy, and welcome, precisely because a person who knows they can refuse is the only person capable of genuinely agreeing. If no opens the door, there is a phrase that tells you the door has actually swung. Voss draws a sharp line between two responses that sound almost identical. You're right is a disaster. That's right is a breakthrough. You're right is what we say to make someone stop talking. It is the phrase of the person who has surrendered the conversation without changing their mind at all. Voss illustrates this with a story about his own son, Brandon, a linebacker who kept leading with his helmet, spearing, a dangerous habit. Voss lectured him about it. Brandon said, "You're right, Dad," and then went out and did exactly the same thing the following week. The agreement was real as an expression of fatigue and entirely fake as an expression of belief. That's right is different. That's right is what a person says when you have described their situation, their reasoning, and their feelings so accurately that they hear their own inner monologue coming out of your mouth. It is not compliance. It is recognition. And once someone has said it, they have implicitly accepted your framing of the world, which means every subsequent step happens inside your frame rather than theirs. You do not get to that's right by arguing. You get there by summarizing. Voss's construction is a combination of the earlier tools. An effective summary is a paraphrase of the substance plus a label of the emotion underneath it, delivered back as a single package. You are not adding anything. You are not persuading. You are simply proving in detail that you have genuinely understood, including the parts that are inconvenient for you. This is where I think the book is at its most demanding, and where it quietly stops being about tactics at all. To produce a summary that earns a that's right, you have to have listened with an intensity that most of us reserve for almost nobody. You have to have understood the other side's case better than they can articulate it themselves. That is not a trick. That is work. And it is work most people skip, which is exactly why it functions as leverage. It also carries a cost that the book is honest about but that readers often miss. Tactical empathy will change you. You cannot do this well while secretly holding your counterpart in contempt, because contempt leaks through the voice, through the timing, through the false notes in your summary. The technique demands an authenticity it cannot fake. Which means the fastest route to using Voss's tools well is to actually become more curious about other people. The manipulation, if you want to call it that, does not survive contact with real practice. Only the attention does. Now the money. Because eventually the conversation arrives at a number. Here Voss makes the argument the title promises. Splitting the difference is not compromise, it is capitulation dressed up as virtue. His illustration is domestic and perfect. Your spouse wants you to wear the black shoes. You want to wear the brown ones. Split the difference and you leave the house wearing one black shoe and one brown shoe. Nobody wanted that outcome. It was not even on the list of acceptable outcomes. It exists only because two people wanted to stop having a conversation. The pressure to split comes from the same place as everything else in this book, discomfort. Meeting in the middle feels fair and it feels finished. Voss's position is that no deal is better than a bad deal, and that the willingness to sit in an unresolved conversation is itself a form of power. He then attacks the tools people use to manufacture urgency. Deadlines, he argues, are almost always artificial and almost always self-inflicted wounds. Deadlines make people impulsive and irrational, and the person most damaged by a deadline is usually the one who believes in it hardest. His counsel is to slow down. Not to stall, to slow. Speed is where concessions get made that nobody intended. He is equally sharp about the word fair. Fair, he says, is the most dangerous word in negotiation, the F word. It arrives in 3 flavors. Sometimes it is a genuine statement of principle. More often it is an accusation. We've given you a fair offer, meaning you are being difficult, and daring you to prove otherwise. And sometimes it is a plea from someone about to fold. His recommendation for the accusatory version is not to fight it, but to defuse it. I apologize, let's stop and back up. I want you to feel like you're being treated fairly at every step. Then you have taken the weapon away and turned it into a shared standard. On anchoring, Voss is more nuanced than the popular summary suggests. Yes, first numbers exert gravity. But he emphasizes anchoring emotions first, using an accusation audit to set expectations low before any figure appears, so the number, when it lands, arrives into a prepared room. He recommends offering ranges rather than points, because a range feels less like a demand and tends to pull the other side toward your end. He recommends non-monetary terms, because the pie is always larger than the money. And he recommends odd, specific numbers over round ones. 37,893 sounds like it was calculated, and a number that sounds calculated resists haggling in a way that 40,000 never will. The underlying claim across all of this is that value is not discovered but constructed. Fairness, urgency, the very sense of what a thing is worth, these are all products of framing, and framing is something you participate in whether you intend to or not. You are always bending reality. The only question is whether you are doing it deliberately or letting someone else do it to you. The most transferable tool in the book might be the smallest. Voss's calibrated questions are open-ended questions that begin with what or how and never or almost never with why. The reason is simple. In nearly every language, why is accusatory. Why did you do that puts the other person on trial? What made you decide to do that asks the same thing and gets an answer instead of a defense? The only exception Voss allows is using why in reverse. Why would you ever do business with us instead of your current supplier, where the accusation is pointed at your own side and the counterpart ends up defending you? The workhorse questions are few. What about this is important to you? How can I help make this better for us? How would you like me to proceed? What is it that brought us into this situation? How can we solve this problem? What are we trying to accomplish here? And the star of the collection, the one that does more work than any other sentence in the book, how am I supposed to do that? That question is a refusal disguised as a request for help. It says no without ever saying no. It hands the problem back across the table and invites your counterpart to solve it for you. And, because it is a question, it triggers the other person's system too. It forces them to actually think about their own demand, often for the first time. Frequently they discover, out loud, that their demand does not survive their own examination. Voss tells the story of using this at Harvard, in a negotiation course against seasoned law professors. He says he essentially ran the whole exercise on how am I supposed to do that, delivered over and over in the disc jockey voice. Whatever you make of the anecdote's polish, the point stands. The question is nearly unanswerable if the demand is unreasonable, and it never once sounds hostile. The deeper principle is the phrase he uses as the chapter's title, the illusion of control. Human beings do not want to be dictated to. but they are perfectly happy to arrive at your conclusion if they believe they walked there themselves. Calibrated questions let you steer while your counterpart holds the wheel. Voss's blunt formulation is that in a negotiation you should let the other side have your way. Is this manipulation? The question deserves an honest answer rather than a defensive one. I would say it sits on a line, and which side it falls on depends entirely on whether the destination is one your counterpart would endorse if they saw the whole picture. Steering someone toward a deal that genuinely serves them, past their own defensiveness, is a service. Steering them somewhere they would never have gone with full information is a con. The tools are identical. The book is largely silent on the difference, and that silence is, I think, its most significant gap. Getting a yes is not the same as getting a result, and Voss spends real energy on the gap between them. His instruments here are diagnostic. There is the rule of 3. Get the other side to agree to the same thing 3 times in the same conversation, using different formulations, a summary, a label, a calibrated how question. A commitment that survives 3 passes is usually real. One that collapses on the second was never there. There is the 738-55 rule, drawn from Albert Morabian's research, holding that in emotionally loaded communication only a small fraction of the message is carried by the words, with far more in tone and body language. Voss's practical use of it is narrow and sensible. When the words and the tone disagree, believe the tone, and then label the discrepancy out loud. There is the Pinocchio effect, the observation that people who are lying tend to use more words, more third-person pronouns, and more elaborate constructions, because a lie needs propping up and the truth does not. And there is the constant warning to identify who is actually at the table. You cannot get a deal from someone who lacks the authority to say yes, and the person blocking you is often not in the room at all. On hard bargaining, he offers the Ackerman model, named for a former CIA colleague. Set your target price. Open at 65% of it. Then make 3 escalating offers at 85, 95, and 100%, using empathy and different ways of saying no between each. Use non-round numbers on your final figure so it sounds like a calculated limit rather than a position. And on the last offer, throw in a non-monetary item, something they probably do not even want, to signal you have reached the end of your rope. The structure works because the shrinking increments tell a story. This person is approaching a hard boundary. It communicates a limit without ever having to assert one. The book's final and largest idea is the black swan, borrowed from Nazim Taleb and used to name Voss's own company. A black swan is an unknown, a piece of information you do not have and do not know you are missing, whose discovery reframes everything. Voss's case study is a hostage-taker who did the one thing the FBI's entire playbook assumed nobody would do. He killed a hostage before his deadline, in front of everyone. Every subsequent protocol was rewritten around that single shattered assumption. Black swans exist in ordinary negotiations too. The seller does not need money. He needs the building to keep his father's name. The client is not price-sensitive. She is terrified of explaining another failure to her board. Voss connects this to 3 kinds of leverage: positive, the ability to give someone what they want; negative, the ability to take away what they have; and normative, the ability to use their own stated values and standards to hold them to a position. Normative leverage is the quietest and often the strongest, and you can only find it by listening for what the other side actually believes. Which brings the whole book full circle. The tools, the voice, the mirror, the label, the audit, the no, the that's right, the calibrated question, are not really a bag of tricks. They are a search apparatus. They exist to surface the thing you did not know you needed to know. Let me pull the threads together into what I think actually survives contact with real life. The first is that emotion is not noise in the signal. It is the signal. Any negotiation strategy built on the assumption that you are dealing with a rational agent is a strategy that will work fine right up until it matters, and then fail. The second is that listening is a technique, not a virtue. Voss's genuine innovation is converting an abstract instruction, understand the other person, into mechanical moves you can actually execute when your heart is pounding. Mirror the last 3 words. Label with "it seems like." Summarize until you hear "that's right." These are things you can do badly at first and improve at, which is more than can be said for most advice about empathy. The third is that no is a doorway rather than a wall, and safety precedes agreement. A person who feels cornered cannot say a meaningful yes, because everything they say is an escape attempt. The fourth is that discomfort is where the value lives. The urge to split the difference, to fill the silence, to accept the deadline, to be agreeable, every one of those impulses is your nervous system asking you to make the tension stop. Learning to tolerate 4 seconds of quiet may be the highest return skill in the entire book. The fifth is that framing is not optional. Fairness, urgency, worth, these are all constructed in the conversation, and they will be constructed with or without your participation. And now the honest caveats, because the book is stronger for them and Voss's fans often skip them. This is one man's field-tested method, narrated by that man, with the outcomes selected by that man. The stories are compelling, and they are also not evidence in any rigorous sense. The 738-55 rule is more contested in the research literature than the book lets on. Hostage negotiation has an asymmetry that business does not. The other side usually wants something you have and cannot simply walk away, and techniques calibrated for that asymmetry can read as strange or overbearing across a conference table with a peer. Applied clumsily, mirroring sounds like a parrot and labeling sounds like a therapist who has read one book. And the ethical question I raised earlier does not go away. These are tools for getting past someone's defenses, and the book teaches the getting past far more thoroughly than it teaches when you should. Use them accordingly. The tactics are real. The judgment about when to deploy them remains entirely yours. What stays with me about never split the difference is not the Ackerman model, or the odd numbers, or even the disc jockey voice. It is a quieter claim underneath all of it, one Voss never quite states directly. Almost every negotiation that fails because two people were talking and neither one was being heard. The positions harden not because the interests are truly irreconcilable, but because each side has concluded that the other is not listening, and once you believe that, the only rational move left is to dig in. Voss's entire method is an attempt to break that loop unilaterally, to be the person who listens first, hard enough and visibly enough that the other side's defenses become unnecessary. There is something almost moving about where that idea came from. A man spends 24 years talking to people at the very worst moment of their lives, people who are armed, cornered, and out of options, and what he learns is not how to outsmart them or overpower them. What he learns is that the most reliable way through is to understand them so completely that they say, "That's right." Not "you win." Not "I give up." That's right. You see me. He came out of 150 international kidnapping cases, out of Iraq and Gaza and Haiti and the Philippines, with a conclusion that sounds almost too soft for the resume that produced it. That the deepest form of leverage available to a human being is attention. That is a remarkable thing to learn in those rooms. It is a more remarkable thing to bring back out. So here is what I would take from this book into tomorrow. In your next difficult conversation, the one you are already dreading, the one where you know exactly what they are going to say, try one thing. Do not prepare your rebuttal. Prepare your summary. Try to describe their position so accurately, including the parts that hurt your case, that they would nod and say, "Yes, that's exactly it." You may find you get what you wanted. You may find you no longer want it. Either way, you will have done something almost nobody does, and the conversation will not be the one you were dreading. That is the real promise of Chris Voss's book, and it has very little to do with hostages. It has to do with the ordinary, difficult, endlessly repeated business of two people trying to reach each other across a table.